I'm gonna stand a little closer. Make sure. Yeah, it's for closed captioning. All right, I'm gonna sit in the audience with everybody too. All right, so Tracy, if you could just give us a little bit of a brief introduction about yourself, that'd be
Sure.
great.
So I actually have a psychology major, a bachelor's. I am working on my master's in organizational leadership and management. And the reason being, business is really involved. If you are being an after-school director and you're in charge of staff, so that's a little bit about that. I actually got into special ed because I have 3 sons, 2 of them on the autism spectrum, one nonverbal, and the other one high functioning or Asperger's. So with them growing up, I was hands-on in the classroom at their schools, and did actually some after-school programs with them as a volunteer. I came up here like
12 years ago?
12 years ago, and I met Nicole at it was a conference for autism, and she was representing the Kids Like Me program there, and I came as a parent to listen to people talk about autism. And I initially was a TA at the school. Well, actually, no, initially I was a volunteer for Kids Like Me. And then I became a TA at the help group in 2nd through 4th grade classes. Got my CBEST so I could be a substitute teacher. And I was working at the after-school programs for Nicole and also helping out with the camp. And I guess it's probably now, how many years? There was a position at the Culver City help group campus that we wanted to really promote the after school and do the summer camp there. Nicole was based in Sherman Oaks, so that's what happened. So I think one of the hardest parts of doing camp was actually the hiring of staff.
Yeah.
And in a lot of cases, here we're dealing with children who have special needs. And sometimes the staff actually had more special needs than the students. So there was a lot of me having to go hands-on and show the staff, so they could mirror appropriate behavior. And like I'm sure everybody sees here, you had to keep reminding them, get off the cell phone. We're reliable for these kids who a lot of times don't have any, there's no fear for certain, in certain instances, like they'll run across the street, even if you tell them red means stop, green means go, yellow means go very slow. If they see something, they're impulsive, and if staff isn't paying attention, you don't want a tragedy on your hands there. So our programs, our after-school programs, we combined everybody, which I think is really important. In our camps, it was divided as per their abilities, and we're kind of leaning away more from that. We really want an inclusive environment, because these kids they need to learn from neurotypical peers. If they're stuck with other kids who don't speak, there's no incentive there. And as a parent, I know when I had my nonverbal son in the classes where he was isolated, there wasn't any improvement. So I did reach out and do extra through the Parks and Recreation, had him join in with neurotypical kids. And he also, my youngest son, is neurotypical. And so that was helpful at home for him to have a good role model.
We're gonna open up for questions.
Yeah, why don't we do that?
All right, anyone have a question for Tracy?
What are the requirements to volunteer at the summer camp for the after-school program that you work at?
Good question.
Well, for the volunteers, we do interviews with everybody. In the organization, we were, before they were vetted through the human resource and the volunteer coordinator. We generally, I think the help group, it used to be they had 12 years old, and then it moved to, is it 18 or so,
We have
16?
some issues with younger children and, you know, and also just, we definitely had quite a few, like Tracy was saying, young adults that had autism or something related to it that wanted to come volunteer, which has its own set of challenges, obviously. But they had more a stringent requirement. We did a training for them, even if they had special needs or not. We did a volunteer training that I actually used to do for the whole agency and train folks to understand what we're trying to do. So right now it's 16 and up to volunteer at their programs and also for their schools too. But I think if they're doing school, it's 18. So for like the more recreational stuff, we said 16 and then it was 18 for school programs. But mostly that you were consistent and that you were able to do a big chunk of time is what we wanted. We wanted, that was the biggest thing, is consistency for the children, is to not have, you know, different people every day, right? So that if you went to come and volunteer, then you'd be there for, you know, every week in an after school program on Tuesdays, that's your day, great. Or you come for a whole summer, right? And you would come either a minimum of 5 days a week or 3 days a week, which is Monday, Wednesday, Friday when we had full kids. So, yeah.
Yeah. And so with the volunteers, it's generally, they are more, have to be hands-off because of legal reasons. too,
Yeah,
so.
you're not changing diapers, for example,
Right.
as a volunteer, yeah.
And yeah, there's a lot of diaper changing.
There's lots of diaper changing, it's fun time.
Yeah. it's-
Anyone else have a question for Tracy? Come on, guys, I know you have questions. Dig deep, please.
Does anybody in here have relatives with special needs or on the autism spectrum?
Yeah, my little nephew, he's on the spectrum.
How old is he?
He is 6.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if it's nonverbal. We don't really know if it's nonverbal yet. But yeah, it doesn't really talk, but he does use he doesn't use sentences, so we'll just use like one word.
He has some language though.
Some language, but
That's
they're hoping that it's gonna get better.
Well, and when I said I have one of my sons is nonverbal, he's functionally nonverbal. He didn't speak at 5. And I remember the professional psychologist saying he's not speaking now, he's never going to speak. He actually started speaking at 10. And so he will express his needs. I want Target toys, things like that.
Hey,
And then if he can't, he asks me for a pen and a paper, and he'll write things down that he wants. And he also will ask for my phone so he can type things out. So there's.
There's ways. I know sometimes my nephew will actually he's a visual artist,
Mhm.
and he'll draw pictures of like what he wants or what he's trying to say through pictures, and they're actually really good drawings.
yeah, that's
Great.
awesome.
So
That's
that's
great.
his way of kind of communicating with us sometimes when we can't like.
Yeah.
But usually when he's like upset, he doesn't use his words, or when he's happy, he doesn't use his words either. He just like gets physical. So that's kind of where we're at right now.
Yeah, it's called Picture Exchange Communication Systems, or PECS. So we're like Greg sitting right next to me. If I hand Greg an icon with a toilet on it, What do you think I need to go do? Go to the bathroom,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, so there's
Yeah.
stuff like that, right? So, but I hand it to him, I have a whole board that I choose from and can do that. And that also is supposed to help prompt language, right? Yeah, so with those drawings that he's already creating, which is awesome, use it. So there's a whole app called ProLoco, which is great. And it is essentially text, right? But it's on an iPad, so you can put a lot more, because like, if a kid is building repertoire and some language that way, it's easier to put it on an iPad. And also too, like, me walking around with an iPad at 12 is kind of better than like a bunch of icons, right?
Yeah.
Too, like thinking about it socially.
Yeah.
So ProLoco is amazing.
What is it
So,
called?
ProLoco, I'll send it to you.
Thank you.
So, of course, it's a really cool program. It's expensive, but it's worth it.
Thank you.
So, and it's kind of like their voice
Yeah.
too. Like, you can have an output and it'll say, Chrissy, I want cookie, please.
Oh,
The whole thing. It's really
yeah,
cool.
That would
So,
be great. actually.
yeah, we'll talk about it. It's
Yeah,
very
thank
cool.
you.
Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else have a person with special needs in their family?
Oh, no, I just-
Oh, okay, go for it. Let's do a question. Let's do that.
Is it? I don't want to cooperate.
It's,
I got it. I'll deal with it.
it is a challenge, but what I think is really important is to get to know what drives each kiddo that is in your after school or in your classroom, and so you can tailor things to make it more appealing. We did have a lot of students with behaviors, aggressive
Mhm.
behaviors, and yeah, you just, as I said, you really have to know each child. One problem that I think we ended up seeing was there was a lot of misdiagnoses of too many people were being diagnosed with autism because the parents could get a lot of funding. And so we ended up getting students who had more, what is it, defiant and
Emotional disturbance, or what it is quote unquote called is emotional disturbance. So more mental health diagnoses like oppositional defiant disorder. Sometimes we get kids with conduct disorder, which is really interesting. And just some pretty severe needs. So, and yes, they would be diagnosed with autism, but what I would see, actually conversely, what Tracy was saying is the opposite. I would see kids with what I call the trifecta, which would be ADHD, oppositional defiant disorder, and a sensory integration disorder. And I'm like, you mean autism? Okay, because that's what that is, right? And then all these other diagnoses do not get you regional center services. So I would have to step in and say, hey, parent, let's get the right one. Let's get the right diagnosis so that your child can actually get some services through the state that you don't have to pay for. Right? So there's some of both, right? Where misdiagnosis both ways. But it's really important. I think we talked about this with Dr. Jamie when she was here during a neuropsych assessment and doing the ADOS. Remember we talked about this the other day? So the ADOS is ADOS, and it's for the autism test to figure out if the child does have autism, but it also teases out those other disorders as well. Okay. All right. Anyone else have a question?
What do you like? What are the kids mostly do in the after school programs? Like, is it a lot of one-on-one work, or is it like in groups, or?
well, we had a variety of after school programs. So one of the favorites was bowling after school. And we would generally have like by 10 kids, there would be 3 staff. And granted, yes, some children needed more one-on-one and hand, like helping them roll the ball or whatever. One of the biggest problems that we had, not only for the after school, but actually more for the camp, was having, again, back to staff, thinking this kid can't do anything, and they all can. So they wouldn't bring them to the art class, and they wouldn't let them partake in the cooking. And with all of these kids, there is a way they can participate, and that's what the parents are paying for too. So you just have to know the child. You do hand over hand with certain things, but you don't do their work for them either.
And some of our kids, we would put volunteers as like a one-to-one with them, so that if the kid needed more support, a volunteer would be there as an extra set of eyes and hands with that child if they needed it too. But obviously, if they didn't have a lot of behavior issues, it was more that they just needed more other support. Any other questions?
If someone's like barely stepping into like the after school camp, would you recommend them volunteering at an after school program first or at a camp?
I would say start off with maybe the after school programs and see, because camp, you really want them to make sure that they're going to be dedicated throughout the whole summer to be there. But I've had success with volunteers in both settings. So it just depends on the personality too of the volunteer and what they can handle, and to make sure that they're empathetic and kind and caring to the kids, and that they're not just there. We did have high schoolers come and to get this special volunteer hours, and with some of them, it was just club. They were still like in high school, talking to each other, and so that's where you kind of need to break them up so they can. It's not just it's not a club. So
Conversely, we had a club though. We had an autism club for kids at Harvard Westlake. So I had one volunteer, she created a club for volunteering with us. It was actually really cool. So what she's talking about is like more fraternizing, right? So again, there's good and bad, right? So, but that's what would happen if we had a bunch of like what we would call kids, right? They would all kind of congregate together instead of hanging out with the kids, right? So we want to